What's up, everyone? It's Ripper here. Yeah, I'm wearing the Innocence Project shirt today. That means we're talking about a wrongful conviction. Now, for the last week or two, I've been telling people on Twitter, Facebook, and this channel that if you have not seen Trial 4 yet on Netflix, you need to watch it. The sad thing is, as good as the show is, this is only one person that the story focuses on. And we know that there are thousands of people in prison right now for crimes that they did not commit. There are people on death row sitting in prison for crimes that they did not commit. And law enforcement knows they did not commit these crimes. The people that hold these offices that make these big decisions, they also know that some of these people did not commit these crimes. Here's one of the big problems. When a conviction is overturned, there's going to be a lawsuit filed in most cases because someone was put in prison for something they didn't do. Therefore, they should be compensated somehow, some way for what happened to them. So it's in the best interest of not everybody, but in the best interest of a lot of these people to make sure these people never get released and the truth never comes out, because it's going to cost the state, the county, feds, whoever, a lot of money. But I do want you to watch the show. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. It's an amazing show. And when I watched it, there's a lot of players in it. There's a lot of things that happen, but the one person that stood out when you're watching the show, you can go to episode 4 around the 26-minute mark, and this lady comes on the screen and she starts telling the story, and you're kind of wondering, why do they have her telling this story? And then all of a sudden you figure it out why. And then the story that comes after that is an amazing story. And so many of you that watch this channel that have helped on the Don Lewis case or the Stephen Avery case, you all are going to relate to some of the things that this lady has done in this show. So I have her. She's in the waiting room right now. She's going to come on here. I was going to do this live, but I thought if I did it live, you guys would be asking too many questions and would never get them all in, and should be on for like 10 hours answering all your all's questions. So we're going to do it this way. And when I broadcast this, I'll be in the chat. I will tell her how she can be in the chat also. And if you want to ask questions, then maybe she can answer them in the live chat. We'll see. Without any more delay, I'm going to bring in Elaine Murphy. She is one of the key figures in the Sean Ellis case that was overturned in 2015. Well, it wasn't overturned. He's getting a new trial, but we'll get all the details from her. So I'm going to bring her on right now. Hello, Elaine Murphy. How are you?
Hi, everybody. I'm fine. How are you?
Thank you so much for coming on here. Of course, I'm a fan of the show, and I'm a fan of people like you who see an injustice and actually do something about it. Now, before we get started, I want to know, how much money did they pay you to help Sean Ellis? How much money did they pay you per hour to do that?
Oh, my God. Of course, nothing. But it was a labor of love.
Yeah, so you didn't get paid nothing. You did it. Why? Why did you help Sean Ellis?
Well, our family had known Sean when he was a little boy. He had been a friend of my son's in elementary school. And he had slept at our house and they went to each other's birthday parties. We only knew him because he was bused to our suburban community. We lived in suburban Boston, a town called Reading. And Sean was bused there every day to go to school. It was pretty much a white town. And the town wanted to integrate the schools much more. And there was a program called METCO in Boston that selected kids from the inner city. And mostly it was whether their parents would be behind it and support it and really get them to that school bus every day. And Sean certainly qualified. And his mother got him signed up, and he came out to our elementary school all the way from kindergarten through the 10th grade.
Oh,
So
wow.
during the early elementary years, my son became his buddy, and we knew him, and what a sweet, lovely child he was.
All right,
Then
so
he,
I have this picture here
there it is.
from it looks like the third grade.
It does, yeah. That was grade 3. I think they were friends in 3rd and 4th grade, right?
Okay, and then of course there's only one African American child in this class, and that is probably Sean Ellis, I assume.
Exactly. That's Sean.
Uh,
Very
okay, and then your son's name is Mark,
right.
and where is he at in this picture?
Well, he's actually in the first row, right in the middle. The kid, right in the middle, facing the sign to the left. In the
Okay,
documentary, they sort of make it look like the kid up above is Sean. I think they made a mistake, but anyway,
okay, that's what I yeah they zoomed in. They zoomed in on the one up there,
I think it
which
might
is
have just
why
been
that's why I wanted to ask you which one was your son. Now, when you talk about these people, the the filmmakers, because you just brought them up, you said they. So I assume you're talking about them, but where are they from? The
So the people who made the Netflix documentary,
yes,
they are well. Netflix is just the distributor. They purchase films, at least in this case, already done. The series, and
uh-huh.
the producers were from 2 companies. One was Gaumont, which is a Paris-based company, and another company called What's Up Films, which I believe is based in LA.
Okay,
So they together, the independent producers, conceived of this theory when they learned about Sean's case, and so they developed the series and then went on to, I think I'm not sure the exact timing of it all, but Netflix ended up producing it and distributing it.
right. So
So they came in, I think around 2017. But
okay,
anyway,
and they're from Paris and California.
that's well, right. But actually, the producers that I dealt with were from Toronto. They were the ones who conceived of it. A lady named Alison Luchuk and a gentleman named Ben Travers. And so they were Toronto-based and working with the Parisian-based director, Remy Burkel. And I'm not sure how I think maybe What's Up Films might have an office in LA, but I'm not sure. It was mainly filmed out of Paris.
Okay,
They were all French speaking. Every time they came, they were all French speaking, except Remy is a bilingual, totally fluently bilingual guy with I believe, an American mother and a French father. And he lives in Paris. So
people
they
up in
started
Canada, they speak a lot of French in Canada.
in Quebec,
It,
yeah.
yeah, okay, but it wasn't like a local film crew that did this. It was someone from outside of the Boston area because
Exactly.
yeah, I from
Exactly.
my experience, I don't think a local company would probably take on a task like this because of and I don't want to put any spoilers out there, but after someone watches the show, I don't think if you lived in that area, you would want to investigate all of this because it can be
Yeah.
kind of scary.
I think you're very perceptive in saying that. It took an outsider to do it.
Yes, yeah. Sometimes I had an attorney tell me a little while ago, I guess in January when I was working on a project up in Kansas, he said it takes an outsider to come in and beat up the bully. He said because nobody in the area can do it. It takes an outsider to come in and beat up the bully sometimes. And I'm not saying that there was any bullies up there in Boston. I'm just saying people from outside, it's less risk for them to come in and do something like this.
I think there's no doubt about that.
All right, so you knew him through a sophomore in high school, so he was like 14 or 15 years old.
Not even, Jack. What happened was, by the end of elementary school, and Mark was probably in the 6th, going into 7th grade, we moved away from the Boston area, went all the way to Alberta, Canada.
Hmm.
And then from Alberta, a few years after that, we moved and ended up in Montreal. And when it was we were living in Montreal when one day in September 1995, we had some visitors arrive from New England to spend the weekend. And lo and behold, they brought along the Boston Globe along with all their luggage. It was a Friday. And on the front page, there it was, you got it, I saw this headline. I just about dropped. I just about fainted. It took me a moment to recognize him and realize it was the same kid we had known, because it had been 1 decade, literally.
It had been 10 years since.
In a decade. But I put together where he lived and his age and name, and said, oh my God, this is Sean Ellis, our friend Sean Ellis. And then I said, this kid is not a cop killer. And I was a wreck. And right away, in that paper, there were hints of, they reprised the whole thing. It had taken 3 years. From the murder was in 93, and well, actually the conviction was in 95, so 2 years, excuse me. And there had been 3 trials of Sean, but he didn't get his conviction till the 3rd trial. The first 2 juries hung. They could not find that he was guilty of any kind of joint venture with a co-defendant, another teenager. And the paper reported that day that there had been doubts all along, that the 2 mistrials due to hung juries, and there were hints of police corruption during the investigation. Specifically, one witness was related to or had a family relationship with one of the investigating detectives. And the bottom line was that Sean's lawyers believed in him totally and were planning to continue the fight no matter what. So that gave me heart. I thought, well, maybe he'll have a chance, because every murder 1 conviction gets automatically appealed. And his lawyers were ready to stay with him.
So you see that article, and it was just by luck or some act of God or something that newspaper that day landed in front of you. I mean, what are the odds? I mean, you didn't subscribe to the paper. You didn't live in the area.
No, I had missed the whole thing. I didn't even know about the murder. I knew nothing. You couldn't get the Boston papers in Montreal. This was way before Google and the internet. It was 1995. Internet was just coming in, and people didn't even have it at home.
Right.
So it took me a while to research the case. Right. I decided once I knew that he had been convicted, and he said he was innocent, and there seemed to be so much doubt around it, some murkiness around it, I kept thinking about it, and I thought, I can never go back to not knowing that this kid is in jail for the rest of his life. I can never unknow that.
Right.
I always know that he's sitting there in a cell somewhere, and I would picture it. And how can I do nothing? So I called his lawyers. First of all, I wrote an op-ed in the Globe that very week. I'm a writer. I was a business writer in Montreal. Oh, there you have it. That's it. And so they published it the week after, and I related, how I had serendipitously come into the knowledge of the murder. They didn't mention my Montreal byline there. They should have. But, it was just crazy. And I got some good reaction from that article from friends of mine around Boston, because, we had always lived in Boston. We were from there. And I thought, wow, the power of the pen. Maybe there's more I could do for him. People said, oh, I shed a tear when I read that, and so on. So I called his lawyers and said who I was, and they recognized it. They had seen the article. And I said, is there any more writing I could possibly do, or publicity? Can I help you out? And they told me, well, wait, we're going to submit a retrial motion, and maybe at that time you can give us a hand with publicity. So I waited. And
how long did you have to wait?
Well, their retrial motion didn't come out until 1998, so this is 3 years. But during that time, I researched the case. Over the year, I think it was the winter of 95 to 96, finally the Boston Globe archives came online, and we had a computer at home. My husband was associated with McGill University in Montreal, and we were linked up to the McGill server. So we were able to get access to various files and so on. So I was able to I decided I would read all about the Boston Globe coverage of the murder from the day it was reported all the way up to the end of Sean's trial. So that took a while, and I wanted to learn about the case. And so then, in the middle of, or toward the end of that reading, boom, what happens? A big corruption scandal hits in Boston. 5 months after Sean's conviction, it was learned that three prominent, well-known Boston detectives were up to their ears in robbing drug dealers, profiting from drugs, taking the money, selling the drugs back in the street, I think, the whole thing. And those three detectives had been key investigators in the Mulligan murder investigation. So that was it. Sean's lawyers used that to write a retrial motion, which they finished in the fall of 1998. It took that long because they had to wait till the indictments came down for these guys, showing they were corrupt, and then the convictions and so on. They pled guilty.
So these detectives, you said they were part of the, and for people that don't know, Mulligan was the cop that was murdered that Sean Ellis got charged with. But Mulligan was the cop. He was murdered at like 3:05 a.m. or somewhere around in that time. It was pinned on Sean because Sean was doing what he thought was right by talking to law enforcement and telling them the truth, that he had been at that store buying diapers, and they probably saw him as an easy target. I'll just tell you, when I had Erin Moriarty on my channel, she said something that I've always believed, but she said, don't ever talk to the police. And then I had someone else tell me, who's an attorney, he said, don't ever talk to the police, especially if you're innocent. He said it will do you no good. And it's kind of sad we live in a world where these people we're supposed to trust, you can't talk to them because you're worried that they'll come after you like they did this. I mean, at the time, Sean was 19.
That's right. And he spoke to police. They brought him in on another matter. Very sadly, 3 days after his cousins. Right. It turns out it was an ex-boyfriend. It was an argument. It was completely unrelated to the Mulligan case. But he had just moved into that apartment, so they brought him in for questioning. And as they sat there, suddenly the questions turned to Mulligan's murder. And he tells me they showed him a picture of Mulligan, and they said, they accused him. And he said, I had nothing to do with that. And meanwhile, he had signed his Miranda rights because he thought, I'm an innocent person. I don't mind talking to the police. He was cooperating in the investigation of his cousin's murders, and they did eventually find the killer. And so in the course of that interrogation, they switched the subject to Mulligan. And he said, well, I was at the drugstore that morning with my cousin, and another guy, but we had nothing to do with the murder. In fact, he was there at 3:01 was the receipt time. The murder happened around 3:45.
Okay.
So wait, exactly, yeah. So that's
right. He was there around 3. The murder was later.
3:45.
That's where I got
around 2:04, the 911 call came in. So just as you say, you think you're innocent. You think, well, I'm innocent, so they'll believe me. Well, wrong.
Right. Yeah. Now, I don't know if you followed the Stephen Avery case.
I did.
Okay. So in that documentary, there's a couple of detectives. Like there's this magic bullet. There's all of this. There's blood evidence. There's all these different things that key evidence that is found. And it just so happens it's found by these two detectives. Like every time, they can go back 9 months later and all of a sudden like, oh, look, there's a blood droplet there. Or look, here's a bullet. I mean, all these miraculous findings by these two detectives.
Right.
Now, in Sean's case, so in Sean's case, you have something similar that happened?
Very much so. I don't even know why I'm laughing. I mean, it's a sardonic laugh. It's not an amused laugh.
I know.
This was, and everyone who watches the documentary says that. Well, what about the guns? Because they found guns, they said, with a murder weapon, and the one was the police Detective Mulligan's stolen revolver. They found them hidden in a field, sort of near Sean's house. And so people say, well, what about the guns? Well, there's so much wrong with the gun evidence that right now his lawyer is contesting it, because he was convicted in the first trial of possession of the firearms, not of murder in the first trial. It's the third trial to do that, but and it appeared the lawyer really believes that the police planted those guns.
I do too.
Thread of anything to do with the guns is linked to one or the other of the three corrupt detectives. Their names again: Asira, Robinson, and Brazel. Asira and Robinson brought to the homicide unit the kid who ended up saying, "I hid the guns." Sean didn't. No one ever said Sean put them in the field, but this kid said he did. A friend, and the police brought him in for that story. And then, as soon as he told that story, which we believe was cooked up, then the girlfriend came up with the very same story after the kid. And meanwhile, the girlfriend had a baby. It wasn't Sean's baby, but it was a young baby boy that she had. And they leaned on her and said, we have the power to take away your kid. This is the prosecutors leaning on Tia, the girlfriend. So she told the story. It was interesting. So that's where the stories came from, rather murky circumstances.
And she testified about the gun in court, but she was being pressured by law enforcement, saying that they were going to, or they could take her child away from her.
Exactly. And then how did police find the guns? Well, they found the guns from a tip that was related to who other than Detective Brazel, the third who sabotaged the investigation. The whole point of this, Jack, is that those three corrupt cops, who actually we found out were in league with Mulligan, the victim, the murder victim. They were all robbing drug dealers together. So the investigating detectives did not want to look very deeply into Mulligan's cases and so on, which the other investigators, the legitimate investigators, were doing, lest their crimes be exposed. It turns out we found evidence through some federal grand jury transcripts that Mulligan, with these guys, had robbed a drug dealer in a spectacular robbery just 17 days before Mulligan's murder. A robbery in downtown Boston of 2 different apartments leased by this drug dealer, and they took $26,000 and piles of cocaine and everything else. And
that's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money.
And it was a lot of money back then.
Oh, yeah. So, meanwhile, and in the course of that robbery, they took innocent hostages and they held them in one apartment and said, "We'll let these guys go if you open the safe for us in the second apartment," which the drug dealer reluctantly did, and they let his friends go. So there were many people who could have come forward with, and spilled the beans on these detectives. So we believe, our theory, and the judge ended up buying it, and the Supreme Judicial Court in Massachusetts upheld it, that these 3 investigators, who really were linked to just about every piece of the evidence used against Sean, and some of the gun evidence I just told you about, that they were absolutely instrumental in the case, and had a huge conflict of interest, a huge bias, because they were motivated to keep their own crimes under wraps. So that's really how Sean ended up getting a new trial but it took until 2015. So he was put away, locked up in 1993 when he was first arrested. He never was let out again after October 1993. And he didn't get released from prison until 2015. So that's
22 years.
Almost 22 years. 21 years, 8 months, and 29 days. So, it took that long. It's a horrible, lengthy process when you are trying to do anything post-conviction.
I don't think a lot of people understand how long the court system takes on something like this. I mean, you were working probably, you say around, when did you start, 1990?
1998. 1998 is when I first started. Once the lawyers put in their first retrial motion, which got shot down 6 months later, it was based on the corruption of the cops. I started visiting Sean at that point, thinking I was just going to help do publicity. Because then I got totally immersed in it. And then his mother got ill with cancer, and she asked me, this is a key, she asked if I would get involved if I had the time, if I had the interest to get involved and help her out in dealing with the lawyers. And I said, anything. My summers were, I was a freelance writer, editor, and my summers were pretty light. So that first summer I went down 1999 with her, and we started digging into things again, the two of us. We dug into the transcripts, and we kept finding things. And I did some investigation, and I kept finding things. And
so one of the first things that you did was you started going into the court transcripts.
Right.
Is that okay?
That's right. I think it's so important to know exactly what everybody said under oath, because that's all that really matters. You can learn a million things outside the courtroom, but it's what's on the record that you have to rebut or counteract or add to and disprove.
Correct.
So
and what about? Did you go through discovery? Did you go through the?
Right. We in the lawyer's office and also in the case file. There's a lot of public information you can get if you're an advocate. The state house, or in this case, not the state house, but one of the state courthouses, housed all of the case files of people, and you just go in and you write out a little slip and you ask to see it. And they hand you a big, in his case, a very big file because he had 3 trials, and you can go through it all, a whole lot of it. And then the rest I saw in the lawyer's office. Nothing totally privileged, but a great deal of police interviews, transcripts of police interviews of witnesses, and so on. It was very valuable, very valuable. And but by digging and digging, we even found some things in the transcripts, which also are public. Once the trials happen, you can get the transcripts. But I was able to read them in the law office. And there was one bench conference that the jurors never heard because it was the lawyers just at the bench with the judge. But luckily, it got transcribed. And usually those bench conferences were not transcribed, but this one was. And it was revelatory. It absolutely blew apart the Commonwealth's timeline because they had a theory that Sean shopped at 3 o'clock, the way I said, and then drove away, parked nearby with his co-defendant, and that they walked back, came out of the woods, and killed Mulligan. Well, in this bench conference, an eyewitness who was sitting in his car in the parking lot related to his wife when she came up from her errand. I saw 2 guys come out of the woods, and it scared me. And she said, "Is it those 2 guys at the phone?" And he said, "No, only one, only the short one, not the tall one." And the tall one was later identified as Sean. Mm-hmm. So Sean did not come out of the woods. And the whole prosecution's case was Sean and this other guy named Terry Patterson went into the woods on one end, came out on the other end. And this guy said, "Yeah, 2 guys came from the woods." But it was only the short one, not that tall guy, Sean. Uh-huh. And then the wife, when she gave her police interview, this guy's wife, she said, "Yeah, there were 3 guys at the point."
3?
Not 3 guys. and the police said, and it's all documented, "You mean the 3rd guy there, right? And now he's missing, right?" And she said, "Right." Did the police ever follow that up? Oh, no. No, they got Sean and Terry because they shopped at the drugstore at 3 and never looked further.
Let me ask you.
By the way, just a quick point, the times didn't work either. That's another whole subject, the prosecution times.
And had you not gone through these records, nobody would ever know about that. Like, right. I mean, it actually takes someone. I mean, you have to do. It's not any fun going through all that stuff. Oh, no. It makes your right, and it makes your brain hurt, and then you read something, you're like, "Oh, I think I read something about that," and then you have another 10,000 pages. Where you're like, "I got to find that other thing." I mean, it's horrible work to do, but someone has to do it.
Exactly. Mind you, Jack, the thing is, a lot of the stuff that we found, and I'm poking around and finding out things, was not something that we could use to get Sean a 4th trial. It was stuff that we could absolutely use once we got the trial. Mm-hmm. So we had to keep refocusing ourselves and saying, well, now we have to get new information that the lawyers couldn't have possibly known about initially. So some of the stuff we found, like that bench conference, where, by the way, the sitting judge wouldn't let that information in. He called it hearsay, and he ruled it out. So the jury never heard that evidence that I just described about the third. Never heard it. So it could be that it could be brought in a different way in yet a new trial. And so there were a whole lot of things that we kept digging up and digging up that would eventually have gone into his future lawyer, Rosemary Scapiccio, would have gone into her arsenal of information she could have brought forward at trial had there been a fourth trial.
Right, because to overturn or to do whatever, I mean, you have to have like a clear-cut Brady violation, or like there's just certain things. Like,
Right.
although you can find evidence that shows he wasn't even there, it doesn't help you overturn or get a new trial.
It has to be something like a Brady violation where the prosecutors didn't turn over something, or new information that's pertinent. So the new information that we ultimately found was the actual connection of the victim, John Mulligan, to the corrupt detectives in their robberies, that they actually robbed together, and therefore the conflict of interest that I previously described. So that was the link that opened it up for the case. The Supreme Judicial Court back in the year 2000 had denied that first retrial motion, his trial lawyer's motion, that one that they made in 98. It was shot down in 2000 because the ruling was, okay, you tell us those 3 investigators were corrupt, but there's no proof that they were corrupt in this investigation, in this murder investigation. They said that was drug cases they were corrupt in. This is a murder case. It's different. So with, Sean's lawyers had said, well, they're liars and they're perjurers. How can you trust anything they touch? They had perjured warrants. They had an elaborate scheme of perjuring warrants, making up false information, false informants, and so on, so they could get into the drug dealer's apartment and steal it. So their whole modus operandi was perjury under oath. Though you write a warrant, it's under oath. They lie on the abandoned. So why would you believe any evidence these guys touched? But nonetheless, the first motion got shot down. So we had to show more than just plain corruption. We had to show a link. That was our theory, that Mulligan was connected with the corruption, and that they had to basically.
Do you need to get that? If you need to get it, I can pause.
Yeah.
There was reward money paid out. There was like a tip line.
Yeah.
And reward money. And I'll just tell you one thing about this Don Lewis case. We have $100,000 reward out there. And one of the things we worry about is when the tips come in, they won't be worked. We're scared. Because in Sean's case, there were good tips that came in, but nothing happened with them.
That's right.
So the reward line that the family of Don Lewis put out, when that reward line rings, guess where the phone call goes to?
I think it's to you.
It's right here.
Very good.
I have my phone and then the reward line phone right here.
Excellent. Yeah. Then they can write affidavits, and of course those are admissible.
Yes, the affidavits are very key to some of the statements that we have gotten. Exactly. But yeah, when I watched the show and they were talking about the tips that had come in and they weren't worked, I just thought, that should never happen. When you have people coming forward, because people are scared to come forward in the first place. Yeah, and now you have people coming forward and nothing happens, and then they're like, now they know I came forward, are they going to come after me? Because we've had a lot of people come forward in this Don Lewis case, and they didn't want to. They're scared, but we've had so many come forward now that at one point they were just flowing in. It was really good, and we still have some that come in. But did they ever find out where the reward fund, like the people who were paid, did they ever find out who actually paid out the reward?
As far as I know, they have not. But that was another late stage development at the very end, where Rosemary Scapiccio was digging and found that several of the witnesses were paid, and then multiple thousands of dollars. But it was unclear who exactly paid them. No one would own up to it. The unions said they didn't. The police department said they didn't, but somebody did. So someone's lying.
If someone paid me $15,000, I would remember who wrote the check.
Right.
No doubt.
a couple of the key witnesses, one was a relative of one of the dirty cops that they had give a very key photo ID of Sean, but it took her 2 tries.
Yes.
They gave it a second try after she got it wrong the first time.
Yes.
So she got, I think, 7,500, and her husband got 7,500, and they couldn't remember, really where it came from, or they were very vague even in the amount. Well, someone gave me 7,500. I'd sure remember it.
I would too.
Yeah, a lot of interesting memories. But the
So-
tips that we followed out, that was one of the Brady violation things that we only found out about. Our big break was when Rosemary Scapicchio, this brilliant attorney of Sean's, finally submitted the second retrial motion for Sean, which was in 2013. The big break was being assigned Judge Carol Ball was assigned to hear the case. And she decided to grant a preliminary hearing in June 2014. So that was just to sort of put her toe in the water. And she heard enough to say, okay, let's open this up. And she opened it up to evidentiary hearings that I think there were 11 or 12 sessions. It took, they were scattered throughout the next maybe 9 months. And amazing.
Did you go to any of those?
I went to every one of them, and I wrote them up for a local newspaper called the Dorchester Reporter. And they're all of them are detailed on my website. I have a website that I started up in 2013 called justiceforshaunellis.com. And in it, I have all the step-by-step that on the case of the various court motions and rulings and, motions for the new trial and so on, and what became of everything. It's quite detailed. If you want the details, are there. It's archived. And so, now I forget where we were.
You're talking about the hearings? There was 9 or 10.
Yeah, the evidentiary hearings they were amazing, and we were very blessed to have Rosemary Scapicchio, someone who is so good on her feet and so scary smart, doing the cross-examining. And so she was able to call some of the investigators who were on the homicide investigation, call them to the stand. One was supposed to be the lead detective. And she just blew holes in the investigation of all the things they failed to do and all the things that they did that were sketchy. And I think the judge really got an eyeful. And it was amazing. And at one of the hearings is when the person who appeared in the documentary, the person who had sex with the victim in exchange for getting her cases dropped.
The lady, the blonde lady.
Yeah, her name is Michelle, nicknamed Misty Hager. She was called as a witness in the hearings. Now, she did not testify to anything but the fact that she was approached after Mulligan's murder by 2 detectives who knocked on her front door and told her that she was the last person called on Mulligan's cell phone. And interestingly, there was no report ever made of that approach. Nothing at all. And nothing that she ever told the police ever got written up in a report. As an advocate, a lot of what I found was important was not just what I found, but what was missing later. That It was just a big hole. Very interesting. So the point Rosemary Scapicchio was trying to make, and did make it so effectively in bringing Missy Hager to the stand, was that Mulligan's cell phone, which was supposed to be missing, someone had that cell phone. Someone had those numbers and were able to figure out that she was the last person called on the cell phone, like immediately after the murder.
Right.
So
who had it? Who had his cell phone?
Well, it looks like it was a Sarah, one of the corrupt cops. The cell phone was not found, or it was said not to be found in Mulligan's vehicle, along with his gun was missing. So police said the phone and the gun were stolen. But they asked the press to keep quiet about the phone, in case maybe they could trace the calls and find the killer and so on. So the press didn't report that initially. But then lo and behold, 1 week after the murder, while the car was sitting in the police lot, impounded, Asira decided he wanted to go back into the SUV. It was a Ford Explorer SUV. He said, I wanted to look for a cell phone charger that I know my friend Mulligan had. Well, lo and behold, there was the cell phone right in the middle of the bucket between the 2 front seats. Wow. So the police were kind of embarrassed. I don't know why this even came out. He said, "I found the phone." Well, they said, well, the first story was the police crime scene investigators missed it the first time. And then that seemed a little ludicrous that you could miss. The phones were like that big in those days. They
In the
were not.
90s, yes.
This is like a real 90s, 1995 phone. And the second story was, well, actually, the phone was always there, but the investigators just didn't think it was important.
None of that makes sense.
Cell phones wasn't important. But anyway, the point, and this is something that the prosecutor accused the police of doing, is that she accused Sarah of taking it initially and then putting it back. And Rosemary, the lawyer, argued at the hearings that they wiped it clean. There were no fingerprints found on that phone. And so Rosemary had the police on the stand and said, "Don't you think that's rather odd? No fingerprints at all?" And they said, "No, not a bit unusual." And Rosemary said, "Even by the user of the cell phone, even Mulligan, not even his prints? No, not a bit unusual." It was so eye-rollingly stupid.
It is stupid because in the Don Lewis case, someone ended up with his cell phone, and then there was a vehicle that was found, and it was driven back by someone, and then 3 days later when the police went to go check prints, not any fingerprints were found on it, on the steering wheel, the doors, or anything. There was fingerprints from the mechanic found on the dash, but it had been wiped down. And why would you wipe down the vehicle? I mean,
Interesting question.
I mean, there's some similarities when I watch this show.
Yeah.
And, I'm just thinking between Sean's case, Stephen Avery, Don Lewis, there's so many similarities that there's patterns. Yep. And no matter what city or state you're in, there's all these patterns that seem they're all doing the same thing. It seems like they're using the same techniques to cover up stuff. And of course, to me, it seems so simple, but I know that there are laws that have to be followed and certain things have to happen. It's really frustrating to me, some of this stuff. I mean, and just watching the show, watching Sean as a kid, as a 19-year-old, have his life taken away from him.
Yeah.
It's not fair. I have some, if someone was going to do what you do. Now, let me ask, have you done this on other cases?
This is just the labor of love because I knew this kid. I believed in him. And my very first visit, he said to me, I'm not allowed to talk about the case. That's my lawyer's instruction. But then his eyes filled with tears and he said, "The witnesses lied." So that was enough for me to go on. And I have to really thank Sean's lawyers, all of them, for letting me, participate in the way that I did. Hopefully,
people don't understand how sensitive some of the information is, and that if you're able to work with some of these attorneys, it's a privilege.
It really was.
Yeah. But on the flip side, especially today with all of the crowdsourcing abilities, there's a lot of information that the public can bring to the table in some of these cases. What do you think was the most important thing that you did working on this case? Well, actually, before you answer that, I want to know, you're married, you have a husband.
Right.
When you told him you were going to start doing this, did he think you were crazy, or what was his response?
No, not at all. I think he just felt, I think maybe my enthusiasm and my conviction were contagious in the whole family, and they knew Sean. And so it wasn't like a complete stranger that it just made logical sense on paper. It was like an emotional connection that we had. And we thought, he says he's innocent, and look at him, he's stuck. And it was apparent that he and his mother also, wanted and needed help. And because I was a writer and I had done so much research and interviewing and so on, just in my profession, I thought, well, maybe I have the skills to somehow do some digging and help if people will let me be there. And I was fortunate to get cooperation. And the thing is that I want to tell people is that back in '93, well, 90, in my case, '98, when I started visiting him, and then onward for the next 22 years, we never knew what would happen next or where this was going. It was always just wait, and then something would happen. I mean, to think back to my first prison visit in Walpole State Prison, a hellhole in Massachusetts, back in October 1998. To think that this would be a Netflix documentary
Yes.
in 2020 is like completely mind-boggling. We absolutely had no idea. We were just waiting and grasping for the next court ruling and next court ruling and trying to get a trial, another trial, to put more resources into getting him, found not guilty.
How long did it take you to drive, like for the hearings or to the prison? How long did it take you to get to these places?
Well, from Montreal to the different prisons, he was in 3 different ones in Massachusetts. It was a 6-hour drive. So I did it myself, and I enjoy driving, and the roads were beautiful between Montreal all through New Hampshire and Vermont. Then in 2000, we moved to California. So this was a whole new challenge. This was just after Sean's case was heard by the Supreme Judicial Court, ultimately turned down in 2000. And my husband was a scientist, and he got recruited to head a major research institute in San Diego called the Salk Institute, named after Jonas Salk, founded by Jonas Salk after he did the polio vaccine. So that was my husband's new world, a very exciting world. And we did a whole lot of flying around the world. We were raising money for medical research. So I tried to route so many of our flights to the East Coast and then on to Europe through Boston and New York. And I would rent a car and manage to visit Sean 2 or 3 times a year, every year. And of course, in between, we kept writing letters. We didn't really do a lot of phone calls. I can only remember a couple of phone calls. One was after an earthquake in California. He was worried about me. But mostly it was by letter and then occasional visits where we'd really catch up. And his mother kept me informed.
So this guy's locked up in prison. He hears about an earthquake in California, and he's worried about you.
I know. Isn't that amazing? That's right. So that made the visiting a lot harder. We ended up back in the East Coast only in 2009. So I was there for almost a decade out on the West Coast. And several of the years were really lean years for Sean. Not much happened between, I guess his habeas petition, which would have been in, I think, 95. 2005, 2003. And then he happened on a new attorney, Rose Vescapuccio, who had become very famous in Boston for spectacular work she had done, putting another convicted murderer named Sean.
The guy that was in for 15 years.
Sean Drumgold. She got him out and received fabulous and well-deserved praise. And Sean read all about it, and he heard about her in the grapevine of the prison. And he said, "She's the one I want." And he wrote to her, and she describes it in the documentary. She was intrigued and went out to visit him, and the rest is history. And he's so fortunate. We're all so fortunate that she signed on, because once she got that between her teeth, she was not going to let go. And she knew from the start. My very first meeting with her, which was in January 2006, I made a mistake in the video. I said 7, but it was 6. I walked in her office, and now that you've seen her on screen, you know how forceful she is. She said, "Teenagers did not kill that cop." Said, "I know cop killers. Those kids are not cop killers." So right from the start, she knew it was.
She knew.
Yeah, she
now,
knew.
Does she have a really good retention ability? Like, can she just remember everything? Is she one of those?
A steel trap. I mean, she's unbelievable. And when she prepares for anything, you can't get in touch with her. She goes into a cave. She wanted, in the course of my dealings with her, I turned over everything that I had. I turned over all of my notes from interviews. I had done a lot of interviews with people who were potential witnesses and witnesses, with a lot of family members and so on. I got the jury foreman of the 3rd jury to talk with me, a bunch of stuff. And I gave her everything. And then she asked me to develop timelines of the murder night and of how did police get to Sean. and so on. So I gave her all of that, which hopefully helped her. And then she took it from there, and of course she did all sorts of investigation on her own and with her staff, and put it all together. And then her incredible ability is to execute in the courtroom, and be so compelling.
You have to have someone like her
Oh, yeah,
that knows what they're doing in the courtroom,
exactly.
and then to be a really good storyteller.
Right.
Because it's all about telling the story in front of
Yes.
the judge or jury, whoever it is. So you had compiled a bunch of information. And when you gave it to her, did you know at that time that you're like, she's the one that I need to give this to? Did you have any reservations?
Oh, not at all. No. Well, she was his lawyer then. He had to dismiss his trial lawyers for ineffective counsel, which was just a
right.
He didn't really,
which I'm sure was hard for him to do.
It was very hard, and they were nice guys. But as we had lawyer friends of ours, and we helped Sean through that decision, my husband and I, and it's a strategy. It
Yes.
isn't harmonious. It's just what you have to do to get to the next level, and everybody fully understood.
Right.
So yeah, she was the only game in town. So I would give her everything I had, dribs and drabs, and as it developed and so on. We kept up with steady communication that way. She wasn't able to stay. She is a busy person. She has a very large and burgeoning legal practice. But I think it helped that I was there behind the scenes. And then when she was starting to get ready to really make the retrial motion, which ended up being done in 2013, it was only after she had made early on requests for Freedom of Information Act materials, which took 6, 7, 8 years to come in. We waited and waited and waited. And then one day, I think it was in 2011 or so, she called me and said, materials are starting to trickle in. And then they started coming in a flood. And that's when we were able to really nail it down. And the key finding I had something to do with, which was, as related in the documentary, I was the person assigned to go through all of the transcripts from a federal grand jury that had been investigating the corrupt cops, the ones who were found guilty of all the drug robbery. So I went through all of the victims. It was interesting. The victims of those guys were all drug dealers who came in to testify, and they were told, it isn't your crimes that we're worried about. We're worried about the cops. So they had immunity from they were drug dealers, but they talked. And a lot of them, there were a lot of innocent people who got caught up in the web that were totally innocent. Like you saw with Jose De La Rosa in the documentary, totally innocent.
Yes. Well, they tied him up.
Unbelievable. So the stuff that I read, and I mentioned in the documentary, and I discussed the details of the way those corrupt cops would go in with their brandishing their badges and their guns, and give us the money, give us the drugs, and were these people going to call the police? Half of them were undocumented immigrants.
You can't, and the cops knew it. The cops knew, these guys can't do anything to us.
That's right. But anyway, going through all of that, and I was looking for Mulligan, and as I described, it took me quite a while to find it, but eventually I found it, and that was one of the key bits of evidence that did end up convincing the court. Now, Rosemary used that, and then she threw the kitchen sink at them. There were a whole lot of other, she had developed this very lengthy retrial motion. You can actually read it. You can get copies of all these court documents on my website, justiceforseanellis.com.
I'll put that back up on the screen.
For real case junkies who want to read it all. And that would be well worth reading. So,
yeah. I lost my glasses once again. How many hours do you think you spent? I know you could say years.
Oh,
we could answer because I know you've spent 20 years? 95?
Well, let's see, from 98 to when we finished the retrial motion in 2013. And then, of course, just attending all the hearings and all. So 15 years solid of research and investigating and just, finding people and getting people to talk to me and so on. So quite 15. A lot. I couldn't ever add up the hours of all that.
I know. It's too many.
But it was my project. It was in my sort of my personal hobby, my project, over and above my regular busy life. I had a career and a family. And by then my kids were grown, but a couple had moved back in to go to graduate school and so on. So we still had a busy household.
When you first started getting into this, if you would have known it was going to take you 15 years, would you have done it?
I don't know. It was
It's a
really,
good question.
it is a good question. Well, with the result that we got now, yes.
Of
But if you had
course.
asked me when things were looking really bleak, I'm not sure. It was lily pad to lily pad to lily pad till we finally got somewhere. But now, of course, that Sean, not only is he, a free man and the charges dropped, the murder and robbery charges, and he's having a wonderful life. He's so productive, working full time for a fabulous charity here in Boston that does, Meals on Wheels for.
He's contributing more to society than the dirty cops ever did, probably.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Yep, he's a motivational speaker all around. He's very active in the Innocence Project here, the New England Innocence Project. It's well worth a look online. They do terrific work.
The New England
New
Innocence
England
Project.
NEIP, and he's been made a trustee of
Oh,
I think that's
good.
him.
Good for him.
And,
So anybody that feels like donating,
yeah,
go to the New England Innocence Project
right,
and show them how much you care and
right,
appreciate the work that they do for innocent
right.
people.
Right. Now, they did not get involved in Sean's case, but since he's been released, he's gotten involved with them and he supports totally what they're doing for people.
Well,
They
they're
were
working with
they
other
were only
people.
working DNA cases.
Right.
I think he had applied to them or his family had applied, but they unfortunately had to turn him down because there was no DNA in Sean's case. But since then, he's worked with them and become surrounded by the exoneree community, and it's been a great support to him to help him heal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very
'Cause
important for him.
he was in a place. I mean, we have a lot of people right now with COVID that are mentally stressed because they have to be quarantined in their homes. They can't go out shopping. They can't go out to bars drinking for months.
Yeah,
And this is a guy that spent 22 years in a
right,
little room.
right.
So,
Let out like 2 hours a day.
right. So
Yeah,
coming back into the real world is shocking, and there's a big adjustment,
very
and
big.
there's a lot of recovery that goes into it that people don't understand.
Because they took great pains to hear out everyone on the other side. And as you saw in the documentary, the police who would cooperate went on and on and on about it. And the whole long list of those that were approached to be given a hearing and let every chance to tell their side of their opinion
Hmm.
of things, and they all declined. So
Right.
it was quite the long list, and I thought it was
It's
excellent the way they kept putting that up at the end of every episode.
Yeah, because people need to know that
Really,
if someone doesn't want to talk,
right.
let's say they don't want to talk, and it looks bad. I mean, if you've got nothing to hide, then by all means you should come out and talk about it. But when you have stuff to hide, yeah, I'm glad they did put their names on there because
Right.
people need to know who they are.
Very, very definitely. And they were very key people. And 201 they declined. You
Now,
know,
what about one-eyed C?
well, that is so interesting because I never heard that till the very, very end, the last bit. And then it came out at the end of the documentary where I want to know where Bunny is. Why aren't the police talking to Bunny? Those who haven't, viewers now who haven't seen it, you gotta catch this at the end of the documentary, where there's a whole new theory of the murder, which was done and somehow in cahoots with a prostitute named Bunny and a man named One-Eyed Mr. C, who was very unhappy with Detective Mulligan and actually did the deed, the 5 shots to the face that
Hmm.
Mulligan died from. Pretty terrible way to die. But he's evidently murdered in 2005, conveniently out of the picture.
Right.
So police still, this Missy Hager, who told the police all about Bunny and One-Eyed Mr. C and their story about the murder and how Mr. C did the murder. Misty Hager said she told the police over and over again every time she talked to them. There's no reports of that. Nothing. Well, they already
Right.
had their 2 suspects, a couple of black kids who were shopping that night.
Easy targets.
Easy target. And you know what? They got him in a couple of days. It was, I
Uh-huh.
think, within 10 days of the murder. They were investigated and locked up. Case closed, and the police had press conference and said, "Look no further. We've solved the case." Well,
Uh-huh.
yeah,
Now,
those two guys exactly on either side of Sean. The one on the
uh-huh.
left is Kenneth Acera. The one on the right is Walter Robinson. They were the corrupt cops who were the third guy who's not in the picture, named John Brazel. They were doing all the drug robberies together, and we found that Mulligan was involved with them. And
How old was Sean in this picture? Is he 19 at that
he
point?
was 19 then. That was when they were bringing him off to prison. You can see the leg shackles they have on,
Uh-huh.
and his hands are
You know,
behind.
what's what's disturbing about this picture is in the Brendan Dassey case,
Oh, yeah.
where I'll just say Andy, the cop Andy, one of the cops who was like a super cop apparently. In one of the pictures when, he's being led off in handcuffs or whatever, that cop is there with him. Just like this picture here with these cops.
Yes, they kept popping up
And,
everywhere.
yeah, and Andy is right there walking
Yeah.
Brendan with I mean, when I saw this, I thought of Brendan Dassey, and I was like, these cops don't let these people get far away from them.
That's
They're
right.
just right there for the
Right.
photos and
Right.
oh,
Those two guys were on top of everything, every last bit of evidence. They and then the third guy, Brazel, were the ones with their hands over every piece of evidence, especially, and we haven't really talked about this much, but just to let your viewers know, the thing that really clinched the case against Sean and got him or actually got him arrested was this, what I call the two-try photo ID. A steer, the guy on the left there, the lady he lived with, in fact still lives with today, and that he had a child with, was the aunt of a witness, Rosa
uh-huh,
Sanchez, a 19-year-old witness who identified Sean from photos and said she saw him in a suspicious pose outside Walgreens around 3 o'clock, crouching by the police car. And so she identified Sean, but it took her literally in fact, 3 tries.
uh-huh.
The first time she got disturbed at a picture and she started to cry when she was shown an array of 8 pictures and said, "Oh, there's a guy in there in that photo array that's been stalking me." So they covered up that guy's photo. So then they said, "Keep looking." So then she knows that there has to be the guy in there, right? So she picks out a guy and said, not Sean, and not the co-defendant, Terry Patterson, another guy, don't know his name to this day, and said, "He looks like the one." She got up and left the station. She left the station with Acera and Robinson, those 2 cops you just saw next to
Uh-huh.
her. Sat in Acera's car with them, alone, with her husband, but the 4 of them. 5 minutes later, the 2 cops, Acera and Robinson, bring her back in the station and say, "She's changed her mind. She wants another look at the photos." And this time they said, within a second, she said, "That's the guy," and she pointed to Sean's photo. Conveniently, the top photo on the left, top photo left.
So the first
And
the first
they admitted
photo,
that. Yeah, the first photo or ID she made, they never had her sign the back of it. She just left the station. And then when she identified Sean, after being brought in the station, having had this private chat with Acera and Robinson
uh-huh.
in Acera's car, they had her sign the back of Sean's photo and say, "Yes, I ID you." Yes. And isn't that convenient? So that was admitted as evidence. Now, Sean's lawyers contested it. They fought it tooth and nail, but they lost. The judge admitted it as evidence. So that
Who
was
was
the key evidence against Sean.
who was the judge that admitted it?
McDaniel. Well, actually, I think it was a judge named Hill. It's in my website. You can double check that, but that was a different hearing judge. But
Okay.
McDaniel was the trial judge in all 3 of Sean's trials and the co-defendant's trial. And when it's interesting to me, maybe you can help elucidate this, Jack, about the justice system. But when Sean's lawyers had to when they put in their first retrial motion, and they had to say, there was, that Sean didn't get a fair trial, and here's the reasons. Who did they submit that motion to? But the trial judge. He gets to rule on whether he had
Made a mistake or not.
And he, of course,
I know.
that his conduct was impeccable, and he overturned and denied the retrial motion. Now, you tell me, is that fair? Don't we all have an instinct for survival? Are we all going to say, "Oh no, my conduct was perfect. I don't see what you're talking about"?
Right.
I can't.
Yeah, I don't want to lose my job, so I did everything fine.
Yep, just fine. So that's what happened with the first retrial motion.
Yeah, that's a problem. One of the many problems with the system
Yep,
is you have a I hate to say student, but it'd be like a student in a school grading their own work. You
yeah.
know, you're like, oh, well, no, this is fine. This is fine. I mean, it makes a zero sense.
Right.
Some of the ways that this stuff is set up,
So with the
and
second retrial motion, as I mentioned earlier, we were so fortunate that those days were gone, and now a whole new judge was going to look at it. In our case, Judge Carol Ball, who, by the way, retired right after. This was her last ruling, giving Sean a retrial and saying justice was not done at his trials.
well, good for her.
Then she retired. That was May, I think, 15th in 2015, and then she retired. So she went out in a blaze of glory, in my mind.
Good for her, because I know a lot of these judges don't want to speak against other judges, and
Right.
but good for her, because the judges
Right.
are supposed to uphold the laws of the land.
And one last thing, if I might, a year later, the Commonwealth had appealed that ruling of Judge Ball, saying, "Oh no, we disagree," and they have the right to appeal. So it was held at the highest court in Massachusetts, the Supreme Judicial Court, and so in 2016 they unanimously ruled to affirm Judge Ball's ruling. They upheld it, and 201. And the Chief Justice wrote the opinion saying Sean did not get a fair trial. Justice was not done. It was a rush to judgment.
Good.
So that was very satisfying.
So there's going to be people that want to help. Like you brought up this, the Mr. One-Eyed Seeing Bunny and all that. There's going to be people scouring the internet right
Good.
now that they're going to be like, we need to figure out
Yeah.
what Elaine was talking about. But what can people do to help Sean right now? Because I promise you, there's going to be people wanting to help. What can people do right now to help?
His charges are dropped, so his case is closed, all except for the gun charges, which his attorney is contesting now. It's only just happened, I think, in the past week or 10 days, that she submitted a new retrial motion seeking to overturn the gun convictions because, again, all of the evidence pertaining to the guns was handled by those corrupt detectives. So the whole thing, there's a house of cards, and now it's fallen. So the new DA here, first black DA, I believe. No, second. First woman
in Boston.
Woman DA in Boston, Rachel Rollins, has said that if this new judge affirms this retrial motion and grants a new trial to Sean, she's going to take a real close look at it and possibly just dismiss the case. So she's on record now on public TV saying that. But as far as helping John, one other fund, he is involved with the New England project, but there's also a personal fund for Sean that is putting money towards his future education. He does want to go to college, and it's amassed a few $1,000s so far. And you can on my website. It's a called a 529 account, which is restricted to just education funds. You can only take the money out and apply it to tuition and so on. And it's a Massachusetts 529, and you can link to that on my website in a very specific spot under news, the news section. There's a link there. It's been set up by a committee from Needham, from his former town where he was schooled in. The Needham Diversity Initiative, I think, or at least they facilitated the way to be able to make direct contributions to that fund. And you can either do it online or you can send a check, and it's to Fidelity Investments, and they give you all the exact information if people are help Sean out. But it's not a criminal matter. There's nothing really anymore that will help Sean. But as far as justice being served in general, to like find the true killer, I think it's right for amateur investigators,
armchair detectives,
to chime in on it. I mean, I'm 75 now. I was 50 when I began this endeavor, and now I'm 75 and happily retired. And
are you tired?
I'm retired. But I think that the area is right. There's so many leads that were not investigated. A lot of them are a matter of public record. There's so much that could be done, I think. And as you mentioned, maybe prosecutors don't want to do it. They haven't done it. As Rosemary said, they are saying they have found nothing, but they're not looking. So
it's in their best interest for this not to ever be solved. Trust me.
Yeah.
I mean, if they come out and say, "Hey, we found the killer,"
Yeah.
They admit they were wrong, like fully admit they're wrong, and then Mr. Ellis has a really nice lawsuit on his hands.
That's right.
I mean,
And the other, besides this Bunny and Mr. C angle, which is so intriguing because, well, just to kind of put a fine point on it, there's been rumors right from the start that Mulligan's, the victim's, pants were found down around his ankles.
mm-hmm.
And so that lends itself to the sex slash Mr. C. Bunny
Yes.
came in to service him in the car, which was evidently his custom. And Mr. C showed up somehow and shot him. That's the theory with Bunny and Mr. C. So if it's true that the pants were down, and these are rumors,
Correct.
and if you notice, there were no crime scene photos taken, which is very unusual. He was already dead. He had 5 shots to his head. He was dead, and there was no chance of reviving him. Yet they sort of put on a thing about giving him CPR all the way in the hospital. And you see it in the video. I think this is crazy. But so that's the one theory. Then the other theory that was real, that really came out in the hearings, is the inside job of a cop-on-cop killing. And there are several leads pointing to that, and one of the most notorious being something called the Foley tip, where a guy came a month before the murder and predicted the murder to one of the detectives in Boston, saying, Mulligan is going to get shot between the eyes outside Walgreens. We know a guy, and they name him, who has a beef with him because he's fooling around with his daughter. And this guy's so mad, he's going to do Mulligan. We've shaken the car, and he doesn't wake up, his SUV. So there's that theory.
Right.
And I heard, street rumors and so on about the man who did Mulligan in, or who was behind the killing, wore the same uniform as Mulligan. So there's that theory. And there's the Bunny Mr. C. And then there's the agreed drug dealer theory. Maybe kids that he ripped off just got fed up with it. Or maybe there's a combination of the theories where all of it could be true.
It can be solved, though. I mean, that's the thing. Someone could solve it if they wanted to do the work, but it is a lot of work uncovering all of this stuff. Now, in your book that you're coming out with called In for Life, it will be out next summer.
I hope.
Hopefully.
Yep.
All of this stuff that you're talking about, and I know you know so much more about this case. I know there's so many things that you know. Is that stuff going to be in the book?
A lot will be in the book, yes. And also, really, I relate my growing friendship with Sean. As I told you at the outset, I hadn't seen him in a decade. I didn't even know if he'd remember me. And he did.
Wow.
And, we were not close, but we became close through my prison visits. I really grew fond of him. And he started calling me Godma because, as I said, he, in the documentary, he felt that the fact I learned about him all the way up in Montreal, quite by surprise, was kind of an act of divine intervention.
It really is an amazing...
Yeah, I know. It makes you wonder, doesn't it?
No,
So,
I don't wonder at all. No, it was meant to happen. I mean, there's...
well, a lot of things lined up. And as I say, at the end, finding the right attorney who brought it all home, did all that work for years of work. So a lot of things lined up just right for Sean, and I'm so very glad.
Me too, and I think you did an amazing job.
Yeah,
And I know people have told you that, and I know Sean appreciates it. But
yeah.
all the armchair detectives that are watching this, I know they're looking at you like you're a big hero, because what you did is something. It's really special. I mean, you did it because it was the right thing to do. You didn't get paid for it. It's an amazing thing that you did. It really
Well,
is.
I gotta say, it was interesting, Jack. It was so interesting. I never knew what I might find next. It was intellectually intriguing to think. I think I can, if I just put this piece with that piece, maybe I'll find something. You know how that feels. My feelings for Sean, my living feelings, really love for Sean, really was motivating. And his mother was wonderful. I like to think I helped her out because she didn't have a car. And, these prisons are out in the boondocks. And so she had no way to
Yeah.
get there. So whenever I'd come to Boston, I'd swing by her place, which was actually kind of far out, and to the north of Boston, and bring her out to visit him. And sometimes, I remember once in the spring, I picked her up, and it was in June, the year she got cancer. And I said, well, when did you see him last? She said, oh, when you were last here, Thanksgiving. The previous Thanksgiving, yeah. So I think things did get better for her. As years went on, I think other relatives did come forward, but in the beginning it was pretty tough.
What do you think happens if you don't get involved? If you never got involved, where would Sean be today?
Gosh, I don't know. It took a village. Honestly, I don't think you could take any one of us out of the jack straws. How they go. I think if you took one away and then the other, it might not work. But somehow it all worked.
It does take a lot of people. There are a lot of people
People
involved in this
contributing
stuff.
their skills and hard work somehow came together. And whether you could separate any one part out, I doubt it.
It is a lot of hard work that I know you have to look back and look at all the things that you did, and you have to be amazed that you did all of those things. I mean, 'cause just a little bit I saw, you're tracking down jurors, you're tracking down all these people. Just to do a couple of those things can be a tough thing. But
and especially, it was because I only have 3 or 4 days at a time that I would be in Boston, sort of sleeping on people's couches, their friends.
Doing what you got to do.
Yeah. But it was interesting. It was just kind of, maybe I read too many Nancy Drew mysteries as a kid, because I read them all more than once. But I just liked the idea of finding something out that might work. And it was just so interesting. And meeting the people was broadening and interesting. And even just dealing with the criminal justice system, as unhappy as that was extremely broadening to someone with the lifestyle I had, sort of like middle of the road, middle class lifestyle, never had a parking ticket, I don't think. And suddenly to find this whole world where I'd look around the prison and everybody's black or brown, mostly, not everybody, a huge proportion of them, and kind of noticing all the injustices going on and knowing about the injustices done to Sean, it was pretty darn eye-opening. And I'm a different person now. So looking back, that's the thing that hits me the most, is that it broadened and influenced my life at least as much as it did Sean's. Me. I mean, it went both ways. So I'm grateful for that. I am very grateful for having had the experience.
So you never knew before all this happened, this whole world of the prison system, the prison for profit system, and you didn't know about all of that stuff.
Oh my God! Never gave it a thought. Not a thought. We don't think the police were in our lives. I mean, and I'm at least at one point wrote about this, that kids in my neighborhood in Montreal, sort of a lovely leafy area of Montreal in a city called Westmount. I mean, the kids might have smoked grass before school, and maybe they shoplifted, and maybe they would get a visit or a phone call from a policeman, and things would be set right.
Right, scare them.
They would just get frisked and brought to the station and slapped with a criminal charge. I mean, there were no, making amends in Sean's world. It was such a terrible world that he grew up in, such a dangerous world. It was killer weekend. Kids carried guns and knives because they had to defend themselves.
Right. To survive in those areas, for people that have never been to those areas and been with people who live there, they don't understand it's a war zone. It's an absolute war zone in those areas. And sometimes I can't believe we still live in a place where all of this stuff happens and people turn a blind eye to it.
I know it. I think it's better now, for sure, than it was when Sean was growing up in the area of Boston called Dorchester, and there's some tough streets there, but there's some other, lovely, vibrant areas too.
Yeah, let's hope. Let's hope it's better.
I think things are changing, and I think the police corruption is not anywhere near what it was in the 90s. But
They're
there's still going on. There are still pockets of it, and
they're being exposed,
yeah,
I think, daily by people like you.
yeah. And someone asked me recently whether I thought there'd ever be an answer to police corruption, and I think maybe I said my answer was that a judge friend of mine had said to me once, we talked about this, and she said there's always going to be 1 or 2% of any profession, police, whatever, who are bad apples or dishonest or whatever. And the key to it all is better oversight, better screening and training.
Yes.
But
Yes.
and in fact, in Boston right now, there's in Massachusetts, there's a reform bill that's just passed, I guess, the state legislature, waiting for the governor's signature, with a much beefed up civilian, a heavily civilian oversight panel. So not just police overseeing themselves, but civilians on that committee, and maybe leaning more toward civilian oversight to bring some fresh air into the process. That can only be to the good, in my opinion.
I agree with you because, like you have these internal affairs, if you report something on an officer, it goes into their system. And
That's right.
It's like telling someone, like if someone came to you and said, "Hey, Mark did this wrong," like you're going to talk to him about it, but you're not going to, you're his mom, you're not going to throw him out on the streets. You're going to say, "Hey, don't do that," or whatever. It's the same thing with internal affairs. They slap them on the wrist and then they let them go. And
they were so hidden, those internal affairs. What they did was they put them in a subcategory called anti-corruption unit. So when Rosemary first tried to get at them, they said, "Oh, you went to the wrong place. It's not the internal affairs we want, it's the other." So she had to repay thousands of dollars of fees and wait another couple of years to get the documents. In fact, she did not get most of those internal affairs documents until a court order with Judge Ball's hearings. It took a court order. One of the first days, I think in August, of the August sessions that were held in 2014, Rosemary made it known to the judge that she had tried and the trial lawyers as well before her, had tried to get these documents out of the Boston Police Department, had been stonewalled all these years. Nothing came out. And the judge looked at the prosecutor and she said, "I want those documents in her hands tomorrow afternoon." And lo and behold, 500 pages of documents literally came in. It was from the internal affairs, from the internal police. And it took that court order to get them. That's not right.
And that takes so much time to go through. Then you have to go through everything.
Yeah, right. Yep.
Yeah, I was talking to an attorney this morning. He told me that they just got dumped from the attorneys over 4 million pages of documents. Over 4 million pages of documents.
Yeah.
He said if it took him, he said, if I read it one page every 4 minutes and I worked 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, it would take me 47 years to go through it all. He figured out how long it would take.
That's amazing.
That's ridiculous. 500 pages is a lot, but to just...
That's why you need these innocence projects, and a lot of them will tap into students. I've been involved at Brandeis University in an outfit called the Schuster Institute for Investigative Journalism, which unfortunately had to close its doors a short while ago, but hopefully it may be getting more funds at some point. But they had student interns, really, kids in journalism, kids who wanted to be lawyers, working some of the cases. They were doing wrongful conviction cases too, the Schuster folks. Very great. They did very difficult.
The Cold Case Institute in Atlanta, Georgia, they do that too. They will reach out to students in colleges and get help from them because you need a lot of eyes on some of this stuff. So.
That's right. That's what I say. It takes a village. It really does.
Oh my God. Okay. It's been an hour and 25 minutes. I figured we'd talk for 30, but the people watching will be so excited that what time is it? I think I can put this out this evening, but they won't care. They'll say in the comments, it seemed like 30 minutes. Oh. It did seem like 30 minutes.
You can cut and paste. But if people want to know more, they can go to the website. Justice.
Yeah, I'm going to put a link to your website
Great.
in the description of the video. And then also I will put a link for the funds to be raised for Sean for his college in the description also. So for those of you watching that want to help, there's a link to Elaine's website down below in the description of the video, and also a link to help Sean out so that he can go and get an education. And if there's anybody out there that works at a college and, you know, maybe they want to help with some, especially right now, online classes to get this guy started somehow, some way to get higher education, I'm sure he would not refuse. But I don't speak for him, but I don't know. But any help is appreciated. So I'll put those in the description below. Elaine, don't go anywhere. After I end this, I'm going to talk to you for a minute.
Sure.
Is there anything you want to add before I tell the people watching we're out?
I don't know, just thinking, because my role, of course, was the advocate. And, you know, I did research and investigating of my own. But I think for people who want to help, prison visits are so important. This is a lonely life, these people, and they need to know people care about them. They need to see, hug, and say hello, and just chat about everyday life with another human being. So if you have any ability to go visit prisoners, please do.
So prison visits, and you bring that up the first time you went, because the lifestyle that you grew up in, you didn't go to visit people at prison. I've been to prisons before to visit people. And the first time you go, or the first time you went, was it scary for you?
Terrifying. The very first time. Terrifying. But you get used to it. You get used to it. But yeah, especially when you're visiting someone they think is a cop killer. They're going to treat you so well. Yeah. But nothing serious. You can let it roll off your back.
Right. You have to.
You just have to suck it up, and just they delay you, and they're what they go through, but nothing terribly abusive. Just trying.
Just mistreated. I know it's not a good place to be to begin with.
No, it isn't. But it's so worth it to the prisoner to have that human contact. It's vital for them.
So if there's anyone there and you want to go visit someone, like Stephen Avery or Brendan Dassey, that probably goes a lot further than we can imagine to have human contact. All right, well, Elaine, thank you so much. I'm sure people are saying thank you in the chat, so I'm going to just say for the audience, thank you for being on here. Thank you for taking an hour and a half of your time. Summer 2021, In for Life will be the name of the book. Hopefully it's out in the summer of 2021, and I will get it. I will read it for sure, because I want to know what else you know about the case, because I know there's going to be things in there. And everybody, thanks for watching. Thanks for sticking with us for the hour and a half. This is Elaine Murphy. You can see her site at justiceforseanellis.com. I'm Ripper, and we're out.